Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi.
First, I just want to say hello to everybody. Welcome to the Orange County Library System Orlando Book Festival. This is the Truth in Fiction panel. And this program was possible by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So welcome, everyone. I just want to go ahead and get started by reading our panelists' bios here. So let's see. Let's start with Jenny Torres Sanchez. Jenny Torres Sanchez is a full-time writer and former English teacher. Her latest novel, We Are Not From Here, is about the plight of 3 Guatemalan teen migrants aboard the death train known as La Bestia. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you.
And Trish Dollar is the author of 5 young adult novels, including Start Here and Something Like Normal. She enjoys sailing, traveling, and avoiding housework. She lives in Fort Myers. Welcome, Trish.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. And last but certainly not least, Caitlin Lochner is a graduate student who writes YA novels about found family, adventure, and learning to love who you are. She has worked as a copy editor, English teacher, and creative writing instructor. Welcome, Caitlin.
Hi, it's so nice to be here with everyone.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So for those in the audience, our topic today is truth in fiction. And the first question I want to ask you all is, and feel free to answer in whatever order you choose, but to get started first, what comes to mind when you think of that phrase, truth in fiction? What exactly are we talking about here? Are we talking about research, or are we talking about, that the facts that we put into stories? What exactly comes to mind when you think of that phrase, truth in fiction?
For me, it really is the author being honest with the reader about whatever it is the book is about, whatever subject the book is about, and not being afraid to tackle, the reality of how things can be. For example, in my book, We Are Not From Here, children who are migrants and who are making this journey, it's incredibly hard, it's traumatic, it's devastating. And being honest about that plight is what, the only way that I think that I can respect and honor that story. And so when I hear the truth in fiction, that's what I think of, is just being really honest with the reader.
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, can I just say what she said? I kind of think that for me too, it's a matter of like, whatever it is that story is about, it's being, as honest and truthful, even when it's painful, even when it's not fun to write or even to read, to have the reader be able to confront those truths as well, and either like understand them better or say, oh yeah, this is my truth, I've lived this.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm kind of the same way. Like, I tend to write in more like fantastical settings. So for me, it's always about that kind of emotional truth and like hitting these points that even if this is a different world, you can still feel where the characters are coming from and the things they're struggling with, and can kind of see how, no matter what world you're in or what background you're from, like kind of seeing that humanity and that same emotional resonance coming through. So for me, it's always about kind of authenticity of characters and emotional experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. It's a little bit ironic too, right? The phrase truth in fiction, because fiction, we're making up stories, right? As fiction writers or novelists, right? We're making up stories. So it's interesting. I find the phrase itself very interesting, because I think, probably all, like, I guess, good fiction seeks to tell a truth in some way. So to segue into the next question, do you feel like it is every novelist's or fiction writer's job to tell the truth in stories?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. And I mean, and even if the truth is obscured by the fiction, it's still there. So, it's like the truth might be hidden in there, but for people to find it, but for sure. Yeah.
I think that definitely the best fiction does that, because having that truth in a story is what allows readers for that story to resonate with readers, for them really to feel connected to it, is that kind of universal truth, that truth that we all share as human beings experiencing, existing and living this life.
Yeah, I was trying to imagine for a moment what a book would look like that didn't contain like truths like that. And I honestly don't think it would be fun. Not fun. Although I don't think it'd be that either. But I feel like it'd be really hard to even care about a book where it just feels like nothing is truthful. Because then it kind of feels like you're being deceived. And I don't think that's like a way to connect with readers or anyone.
Yeah. Well, be thinking about that, because I have a question related to that I'm going to circle back to. So yeah, be thinking about that one.
Well, like even in the most fantastical settings, even in, fiction that's not contemporary. I mean, I feel like all authors are trying to get to that truth and trying to show, some sort of truth in the story, in the writing, whether it be connection between characters, emotional, what they're feeling emotionally, not only what they're encountering, but that struggle within. Whether you're a human character or not.
So to sort of in line with that, do you feel like do you feel like fiction is a way to deal with uncomfortable truth then? And then why or why not? Like, why do we find that writing stories is a way to sort of put those uncomfortable truths into basically a spotlight?
I mean, I think that's what it's all about. I really do. It's like, everything that I've ever written has, uncomfortable truths in it. And then, it's like readers want to know that they're not alone, and we're telling them you aren't. There's someone, like even if you can't find someone in your real life who's going through that, there's someone who's been through it, or this character is, and they know, they know what you're feeling. We know what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing being able to kind of create that connection through words. And for me, a lot of the times it's about being able to say things that I don't feel maybe are necessarily heard or listened to, and try to say it out loud. So the current book I'm working on is about a character struggling with her asexuality and not really knowing even what that is. And I had a similar point in my life. And when I tried to talk to certain people about it, it didn't feel like they were really listening. They kind of just kept telling me like, oh, you just haven't met the right person yet, or like, oh, you'll change your mind when you get older. And so for me, it's like a way to get all those thoughts out and explain like, no, that's not what it is. So for me, it's almost therapeutic. And it also shows like, especially younger readers, because I write YA, that like, this is something that you can experience. It is valid. Like, you're not alone, basically. So creating those connections, like Trish was saying, is something I really love about writing.
Yeah. And, exploring that discomfort in fiction, it kind of gives access to the reader to explore that reality, right? Something that may be difficult to confront in real life. Here is somewhere where you confront it, you can confront it, you can explore it, you can think about it, you can, see how characters react and how they work through things as well. So I think having those kinds of hard truths in fiction helps us to, confront that discomfort in better ways, and then be able to apply it to our own lives, and readers to apply it to their own lives.
Do you think truth in fiction can only be uncomfortable? Can there be such a thing as truth that's just truth and it doesn't cause discomfort?
Yeah, definitely.
Say, yeah.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Oh no, you go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I think that it's absolutely necessary to be willing as a writer to confront the uncomfortable truths, right? To be honest about all things.
Yeah.
But that's definitely going to, encompass like beautiful things also. Like in my writing, because I want to be honest about everything, and because I do focus on writing about uncomfortable truths, I try to balance it with including the beauty in our world, and including what is beautiful, and looking and searching for those things. And there's hope, there's love, there's friendship, there's family, and those are all things that you can definitely write about in a truthful way in story as well.
Can I just co-sign that?
Yeah. I think especially for young readers, right? Like I think, at least for me, I write for young readers. I write about those uncomfortable truths because I want to be honest with them, and because I think young readers can handle them. But ultimately, I also want them to know that there is beauty in the world, and there is hope, and the world is a beautiful place as well, even with these darker things within it.
Oh, totally agree. And I think there's so much room for, like we talk about issue books that tackle all of those difficult subjects, but there's so much room for joy and happiness, and letting our readers like see those things as well, and know that being happy is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think all truths necessarily have to be difficult or heavy. Like you were already saying, like as much bad as there is, there's also good. Like for all the people who will like reject certain truths, there are also people who will accept them and accept you for who you are, and kind of showing that more loving, hopeful side in fiction is almost what makes it, I don't want to say worth it, because that makes it sound like the hard ones aren't, but they are. It's all worth it. Words are hard. This is why I write. But I love being able to show that, like, especially like really loving, caring relationships, because especially when you're in circumstances where maybe that's been hard for you to find, like showing that there are people who will love and accept you also is a really fun truth to be able to depict and show alongside those more difficult truths.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think about, no pun intended. I think about, writing, I write romance, but I also write dark YA. And like, I think about how in romance, the truth really is like between the two love interests, right? And like the whole way they're falling in love, but they're also a lot of the times denying that love and denying that they're falling in love. So the truth there, it's a little bit lighter, right? But there's still a truth there. So yeah. So how I want to get into, a little bit more about, your process with writing truth. So how do you all approach truth in your own work? Do you start your stories with a seed of truth, or are you simply starting with a fictional idea that ends up having an element of truth, or even like some sort of theme of truth in it?
I think for me, it's the latter. Like I know what I want to write about, but I don't necessarily get to figure out what it is that the truth in my fiction is until I've, had a chance to really think about it and work about it and develop the characters and figure out who they are and what they want. And it's usually in that point where I figure out who they are and what they want that I'm like, aha, there it is, So for me, it's part of figuring it out. I don't necessarily go, this is what it's going to be, the theme or the idea or the truth. It usually comes later for me.
Yeah, for me, it's very much like, sorry, let me cut you off again.
Oh, no.
For me, it's very much what the character's truth is. So for me, it starts with the character, and I have to just kind of hang out with that character and get to know that character and learn about that character to know what it is that they're confronting, or what they're dealing with, or what sense they're trying to make of the world. And so the longer that I'm with that character, and the longer that I get to know them, the more I can get to that character's core and understand what what truth, what revelation they're coming to. And that's how I approach truth in fiction for my stories.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same way. If it's a movie, it's like an overhead shot that slowly zooms in. I feel like with every draft, I get closer and closer to figuring out who my characters are and what the story is actually about. Because I feel like I tend to start with like a general concept, like, oh, like these four teenagers who can't get along are like have to stop a war from breaking out. And so after that, like I start, as I write, I kind of discover more about like, okay, so who are these four characters, and kind of getting into more specific details and finding out what matters to them as I'm writing the story and discovering that along the way. And I feel like it's not until usually like the second or third draft that I kind of start feeling more of that emotional truth and what matters in the story.
So it sounds like everybody here is pretty character driven, and like these truths sort of happen organically. Now, for your protagonist. Now, I want to ask you about your secondary characters, because sometimes secondary characters have truth that they need to either get out or realize as well. Do those happen for you the same way? Are those organic as well, or do you, how do you decide? You know?
Yeah, I think for me, it just happens organically. You know, with those secondary characters, it's seeing the relationship that the main character has with those characters, you know, and then within their interactions, seeing their interactions and what they're talking about and how that secondary character becomes important to the main character, you know, is how I kind of get to what the truth is for everybody involved in this story.
Yeah, I'd say my process with secondary characters is kind of similar to the first. Like, I don't generally go in like knowing really who these characters are until I'm writing them. So I kind of discover after seeing how they interact with the main character or characters and figuring out who they are and how their truth might affect the main characters and vice versa, and how everyone, because everyone has like different points of view and perspectives. So I think it's always really interesting seeing how those perspectives can sometimes clash, and people have to face those truths and decide like what is important to them, especially in the face of other characters who believe different things. So I'd say I discover their truths at kind of the same time as the main characters.
For me, it's typically a surprise. Like my secondary characters usually are the ones who surprise me with what they want and what their truths might be. So it is for me organic as well. I don't go in knowing, and sometimes secondary characters will just appear, you know, like all of a sudden I've got this character that I'm like, where did they come from? And you know, and they're the catalyst for something important. So you know, it really is kind of like I kind of fly by the seat of my pants with most of my work. So you know, at this point, I'm not actually really surprised when a secondary character becomes, you know, something bigger.
I like to fly by the seat of my pants as well. So, to get just a little bit more technical here, so I came across this article by the author's name is September C. Fox, right? And one of the things that September said was that um, there are like two kinds of truths: absolute truth and worldly truth. And you know, by worldly, what's meant is like, you know, of the world, not necessarily like a wicked world, right? So absolute truth is comprised of like eternal ideal teachings, right? Like things like love conquers all, be true to yourself, you know, never give up. Um, and it kind of is the way it presents the way that life should be, right? Worldly truth is comprised of teachings that like hold true in an imperfect world. So feed these things feed and entertain people, and can make them lose, you know, political power. Sometimes, you know, the oppressed might grow more ruthless than oppressors. um, and it kind of presents us with how life is, right? So how life should be versus how life is. Where would you say that your work sort of falls in that. And also maybe yours is a cross between the two, because I think that that's possible, as well. There are some stories where, it's more of an absolute truth that's sort of at the forefront rather than the worldly truth. But then there are stories where there's a crossover between the two. So where would you say that your work falls?
Mine, I think, is like pretty solidly in the middle, because I think in my truths, I want to tell the absolute truths about how things can be, but also you want to be truthful about how things are. So if you have a character, like in Start Here, I have a character who is bisexual, and she's trying to, make sense of that in her own life. And, it isn't always perfect. There's not perfect acceptance. You have, people who are rejecting you, who are straight and on the LGBTQ, and saying, well, you're not legitimate. And so she's trying to decide whether, I didn't want to give her a perfect world in which every single person, like the people who care about her, certainly accept everything about her. But, she knows that it's not an easy life. So, I try to find that balance between like the utopian idea of everything working out just fine, and this is how the reality is.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I think for me, exact same thing. It's like pretty right smack in the middle, because again, you want to present the hope and the beauty and all the positive things in the world, but not at the expense of, saying that things are always going to turn out perfectly. My endings for all my books, there's never, I tell readers, there's never like this nice pink tied little bow at the end that, wraps everything up really pretty. I like to leave readers in a space where they're thinking and they're reflecting, and they're reflecting on the fact that sometimes, there is this unfairness in the world that doesn't quite balance out, or tip to the side of fairness. And sometimes there is, the undeserved win, because that's the reality of the world, but at the same time, not do it in this way that, is so bleak and so terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say the same, with kind of going both ways, because I don't think you can write about one truth without having the other. Because if you only have absolute truth, it doesn't feel realistic and it doesn't really resonate with readers. And if everything is perfect, then it almost feels like, what's the point? I think there's a saying that people don't want to read about happy people, and it's because there's none of that conflict, really. Like, if everything was perfect, then why write this book? I feel like you have to address like the realities of how things are, even if it's not how you want things to be. And so I think kind of battling against like that hope, along with, unfortunately, the way the world is what makes for a story that like really, I feel like I keep saying resonates, but I'm going to say it again. I think it's necessary in order to connect to a reader, and also to not give a reader like false hope that, like with Trish's example, like if you are bi and you come out and you have the expectation that like every single person in your life will be like accepting, I think it almost feels like deception on the book's part if it's only presenting this absolute truth and it's like, oh, everything's going to be fine. So I think it's also a way of kind of preparing people who are going through struggles, like brace yourself, but know also that there are people who will love you and accept you. So I think kind of balancing the two.
That brings up, Jenny said something just now that made me think a little bit deeper, because she said her endings are not tied up very, like this neat little bow. And I wonder how, because I think sometimes when we think of this, truth in fiction, we think of like that it maybe needs to have an ending that sort of ties everything up to like, here is the truth. Like, I present to you this truth, and your ending should be, sort of well tied up and all of these things. So do you think maybe that the cross between the two, right, those absolute truths and the worldly truths, I wonder if that informs your ending, right? Like you can have a not so tied up ending if you sort of have this crossover between those two kinds of truth. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think if you do have that crossover in there, then, and I mean, it's how you write it. It's how you write it. I mean, if you write this story that's just like all this terrible stuff is just happening, kind of like if you go, how Caitlin was saying, if it's all absolute truth, then it becomes, unrealistic. And but also if it's the other way, all worldly truth, it becomes so bleak. It's like nobody wants to kind of go through a book like that either. So I think having a balance of the two, and then you have allowed space for there to be this ending that is satisfying, even if it's not this perfect happy ending, even if it's an ending that leaves you at this place where you are reflecting about, unfairness, or you are reflecting about the things in the world, because that is satisfying to reflect on those things and to understand them better and to learn from them.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Caitlin.
I was just going to say, I feel like bittersweet endings where characters have both gained and lost always feel like the most, not quite realistic, but it feels like the most satisfying ending, I think.
Yeah.
Because the world isn't just about like, oh, I'm only losing things, or, oh, I'm only gaining things. Like, I think that balance and that recognition of, again, like that hard truth with like the more hopeful truth is always a really satisfying ending, like having both of those side by side.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'm sorry. I have a visitor, and
what does he think?
he will not be denied. I think for me, hopeful is the key word. Like I leave all of my books on that ending where, there is something for readers to think about and to know that, like for example, and Start Here, the two main characters spend the entire trip trying to decide figure out what they are to each other, because they had a mutual friend and they don't know what they are to each other without her. And so, they're left in a space where we're not certain what they are, and they're not certain. Like the answer that they thought they were going to have just never quite, it's like, yes, she's my friend, but is she going to be my forever friend? Does this thing that we've been through bond us, in a way that we will always stay together, or will we visit each other once again someday as older women and, remember this time? And so, like I wanted it like that on purpose, because friends come and go in your life. And, sometimes they're there when you need them, and then you find another new friend, so, I think I like leaving my books in a hopeful place.
Yes.
I like what Trish, when you said uncertain, I think a lot of us, or I get the sense that you, both of you also, and myself as well, we're kind of writing to have readers be okay with the uncertain, because nothing is certain, because this world is like this wild, messed up, beautiful, wonderful world. There's so much uncertainty. And, I think a lot of our characters even probably start at a certain place searching for some kind of ultimate truth, that they are not going to find this ultimate truth, because, that ultimate truth really kind of doesn't exist. And it's more of a personal journey of coming to terms with the uncertainty of the world and the senselessness of it, even as we try to make sense of it.
Yeah. I love that. So I want to circle back to that question about, and by the way, I have more questions, but if the audience would like to ask any questions, do feel free to put those in the chat now. But then while people are doing that, I'm just going to read this next question. But going back to books that aren't seeking truth, I think it is possible to have books that don't seek truth because I have seen them. However, and these are books that, like, just to clarify, these are books that, maybe they are, they tend to glorify something that should not be glorified, or they might, like, desensitize us with regard to a specific topic or something. So it is possible to have that kind of book. And I think, now, because I think we're all becoming more aware, publishing in general, like, people are, sort of speaking up more when we see things like that. But do you all think that books like that are dangerous? Books that don't seek to tell a truth?
I'd say yes, because if they're not seeking truth, that means they're perpetuating lies. Like, I can't imagine a book that's not seeking to find the truth of something and isn't also presenting this harmful idea or content, like, in order to distract from the fact that, like, there are terrible truths in the world. Yeah, I'm having a really hard time putting my thoughts into this on words.
I know, I'm asking really hard. I'm asking hard questions.
Also raises the question is, like, what if the author of that book thinks they're presenting a truth that's harmful, but they don't see it that way? So it's a conundrum, but
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it almost, it's like on a case-to-case kind of basis, and so without kind of having a book that kind of like, as an example of that, it's really hard to say because, like Trish said, maybe a writer feels that they are getting to a truth, and maybe, like Caitlin says, it's really just perpetuating lies. It's really more something that's manipulative and, just presenting things as they are not. And so I think it boils down to the author's motive, and even when it is the author's motive, it's hard to know if it comes from an authentic place or not.
Yeah. And it also, I love that. So, right. And it also makes me wonder, like, what exactly then, are we telling our truths when we're writing these stories? Or are we telling, like, the characters' truth? Like, whose truth is it? Is it a mix of both?
I think it's like, for me, it's mostly a character's truth, and within it, there's always these ribbons of my own truth, that find themselves into every story. And it's a character's truth, and I'm also presenting them in a world that I hope is reflective of the reality of our world. And so that way it's the truth of what it means to live in this world, depending on your perspective and who you are and your identity, who is moving through this world, and so that has to be reflected in my character's truth as well.
Yeah. I think there might be audience questions. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Hey, Pam. That's my critique partner, you guys. Hi, Pam. So she says, hi there, Marquita, and I would like to ask the panelists, what do you all do for self-care when the truth gets too heavy in your novels? Oh, I love that question.
I'm going to answer first, only just because this dog has been really unpredictable. And most of the time when I'm muted, it's because there's lots of sounds going on in the house. But I tend to listen to a lot of music that makes me feel uplifted, and sometimes I have to take a nap and, like, turn off my brain for a while.
Yeah.
Caitlin, you want to go?
Sure. I tend to go into things that have other stories. So for me, whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, webcomics are my go-to. I don't know why, but there's something just very, like, soothing about them. Or I'll play, like, video games, or I'll read a book that I've read before that, like, I remember feeling really good when I read it. So kind of going to the familiar and the comfortable for me, and usually in the form of stories. in some media or other.
I'm very similar to Trish in that I go to music and, things that inspire me and things, I look to like art and poetry to kind of reflect the beauty of the world back to me, because when I'm writing something dark and when I'm writing something heavy, it can be overwhelming. And so I go seeking for to what reminds me that the world is a good place.
I love that. Awesome. Let's see. I think there are more. Oh, yay. One from Sarah. What is a book you read that you felt like told a great truth?
Oh, that just an easy question there, Sarah. That's hard. I'm going to sit here and think about it for a little bit.
I actually have one.
Or even authors maybe too that do a good job of it.
So I just recently finished reading In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And that was an amazing book that I would recommend to anyone about, I'm going to paraphrase this, and it's not going to sound nearly as like eloquent or amazing as she actually wrote it, but it's about archival silence and how the way that like we record history is dependent on kind of how the people who have power decide what is important to actually document or not. And so the topic that she was going over was abuse in gay, specifically lesbian relationships, and how it's kind of covered up. And people think that like this isn't really a thing that happens, or it's the total opposite. And it's the stereotype that like lesbians are crazy. And it was kind of going through her own experiences with an abusive relationship. And I thought it just covered such a myriad of topics in such like an honest, vulnerable way. And it was really, really amazing and kind of just made me feel things for days after I finished.
Yeah. He's still
Trish?
I'm sitting here thinking too, and I'm like drawing a complete blank. These are the questions that when I'm on the spot like this, I'm like, my brain just freezes up.
I know. Same. I mean, I'm not sure. There is a book called Human Acts, and I can't remember the author right now. But and it deals with a lot of trauma and a lot of and violence. And I just remember at the end of that, and it doesn't shy away from it at all. There's as a reader some real brutality that you encounter in that story, and yet at the end of it you also feel like that you've just read something really beautiful, even though it has been so brutal. And so I would say I do remember finishing that book and just being kind of like overwhelmed with the sense of what life is, and what living means, and how it can be so different for so many people depending on when you were born into this world, and where. And so that's a book that I remember feeling like it was powerful and very truthful.
Yeah. I mean, I can answer the question too, but
Go for it.
well, I talk about this author all the time because she's like one of my favorites. But like Kathleen Glasgow,
Yes,
Girl in Pieces, I think she's really, really great at that. And even her second book, How to Make Friends with the Dark, same thing, where the characters sort of have these, deeply traumatic events, and they're just trying to in both of them I feel like both characters are trying to like find themselves. I also recently read Grown by Tiffany Jackson, and I think that character in that novel is also trying to tell the truth, and Tiffany Jackson's really great at doing that. And not to call Pam out, but Pam's book I think does an excellent job at that too, missing children, and in especially within the Black community, and the truth about how that's dealt with when you look like us. So yeah, pretty much all the books I read I think do have to do with that, like do with the author's seeking truth in some way. But I definitely have read some books where it's kind of like, no.
Well, now that I've had a chance to think about it,
Yeah.
I think that everything that A.S. King writes has got that great truth. I think she's amazing, and I'm so jealous of her talent and her brain.
Yeah, A.S. King is actually one of the reasons that I felt as a writer that it was okay to go there. That it was okay to deal with these kinds of truths in young adult literature. Was
Yeah.
because of the way that she does it and how she does not speak down to her reader and does not try to present the truth in any other way other than, the harsh truth of it. But yes, A.S. King, 100% totally agree.
Yeah. I mean, we could honestly go on and on all day. Authors doing that, Lori Halls Anderson just popped into my mind as well. But I think we have other questions in this box. So let's see. Okay, so here's one from Nicole. Does the setting also have to have truth? Does that lead you toward writing in your area or areas you've visited or lived, even in fantasy worlds woven in some truth?
Well, I mean, if I base it on somewhere that I've lived or visited, then I definitely feel like I have more of an anchor, in terms of like being able to write, with that place in mind. But I mean, I think you can have these places that you haven't visited, but for me anyway, I think that they're still based on somewhere that I know, because that's what I need in order to anchor myself in a story and really kind of like feel in it and then be able to write.
Yeah.
So I write mostly in kind of fantasy or sci-fi world settings, and I think it depends on what you see the truth as, because I think you have to adhere to the truth of that world. So in Soldier and a Liar, it's like post-apocalyptic and everyone lives in this dome. And so I feel like the truths that will exist in a society that lives in that sort of environment is going to be different from truths from like today in our world where people can travel across the world and do all of these different things. So I think the world and the setting itself will shape what becomes true to that world. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I find that the setting tends to lend itself. I mean, most of my YA, or I should say the first three at least of my YA novels are set in Florida, and each place was specifically chosen for like what it lent to the story. So I don't know that in itself it has the truth in it, but it's like it was part of the bigger picture. So like for example, in Where the Stars Still Shine, I chose Tarpon Springs specifically because if you're not like there's this little pocket of Greek life there, and if you're not Greek, it's kind of weird. And like I tried to imagine like what it would be like to be dropped into that and expected to be part of it. And so like it is part of her truth, is figuring out who she is and what this whole community means to her. So I think that there is a deliberateness, at least on my part, to the setting that lends itself to the characters either figuring out their truth or so it might not be deliberate in terms of like, hey, I picked this location exactly for the truth, but it sort of is all part of it's a piece of a bigger puzzle.
Awesome. I think we got a few more. Okay, so here's one from the Brown Sugar Baby. Hello. What what comes first for you in your writing process? The characters, the plot, or the truth you are hoping to share? I know you guys touched on this a little bit, but if you have any other thoughts on it, feel free to share.
I'll go. For me, it's different for every single book. You know, like like I've had some books where like the character just comes sort of roaring into my head and says, "Hey, listen, I have this story I need to tell you," and they come, you know, kind of fleshed out already, and I don't know how that happens. In my, you know, the last question, literally the place came first, the setting came first, and I was like, this is a weird place. How would I put a character in here? And so I did, and then, you know, things started evolving from there. And but it literally is almost always character or setting or plot. Truth tends to work itself into the story as I'm figuring out the plot and the characters and the setting.
Yeah, the truth almost definitely always comes last for me, because that's something I discover along the way. But I think, like Trish said, it really depends on me. Sometimes the characters come first, sometimes the plot. Sometimes I go to a place and I'm like, wow, I really want to write. So for an example, last year, pre-pandemic, I visited San Antonio and I was like, wow, I really want to write a town or write a book that takes place in a city like of canals, because this place is just so cool. And then it wasn't until like months later that I came up with like characters or plot. So sometimes I don't even necessarily know what I want to write. I'm just like, this seems really cool. I need to figure out how to use it somehow.
Yeah, that's my exact experience also. But I will say that the story doesn't begin for me until that character shows up. You know, I definitely am inspired and influenced by the things that are going on in the world. Like for We Are Not From Here, obviously the humanitarian crisis, you know, at our southern border, unaccompanied minors making this journey on their own definitely, you know, inspired that story. But the story itself didn't start until that character Pulga showed up for me and I was getting to his story. The same thing with Because of the Sun. I visited Columbus, New Mexico. I went there for the first time, you know, like 20 years ago. And I remember landing there and going out, driving out to the desert, like where my in-laws live, and there was nothing and no one else around, and being like, this place is amazing, you know, and there's like so much to think about and write about this place. But I didn't write the story that was set there until, you know, over a decade later. And it wasn't until my character showed up and she was kind of hanging out with me and telling me, you know, what she was going through. And then I realized she lives there and this story is set there. And that's how, you know, so really inspired and influenced by many things, but the story for me starts when the character shows up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it can all sort of like work. It's all working together and sort of weaving, right? All of those things sort of weave into, you know, whatever the truth is that the character is trying to discover, or, you know, trying to get across even to the reader. So and the author too, right? Whatever truth that you maybe want to put out there. So yeah, I think we're pretty much at time. I mean, I personally could talk to you guys all day. I really could.
Me too.
This has been so much fun, and you know, I admire and, you know, just respect you all. I can't wait to just kind of keep up and see what you all are doing and, you know, what's to come. So thank you, Caitlin, Trish, and Jenny, for being here, giving us your time, and, you know, sharing your truth.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to find out when we have new fun and informative videos for you. Orange County Library System is your place to learn, grow, connect.